This is a fascinating topic. Um, and I love to share what I understood and what I think is most important in this topic, Kashmir Shaivism as well as neuroscience. It's a big topic, but I think I'll try to share as much as I can, as clearly as I can. Kashmir Shaivism is a long tradition from 850 CE, and it has many vast literature. But I studied at least 4 textbooks in Sanskrit of Kashmir Shaivism, and I tried to correlate their key ideas, important self-observations. They were tremendous. They are just as contemporary as today's modern neuroscience. And you will see the similarity between the observations made thousands of years ago and what are being expressed in neuroscience today. So let me start with that. I want to start with a Namana by Santa Dnyaneshwar, and this is about Shiva Shakti. This is in Marathi, but I hope some of you at least will understand and appreciate. Shiva Shakti Samaveshe, Namana Kele Mya Aise, Rambha Garbha Akashe, Righalaya Jaisa. केळीच्या खुंटाची सर्व सोपटे सोलून काढल्यावर त्यातील अवशेष पोकळीच राहते. त्या पोकळीचे महाकाशाशी सहज मिळणे आहे. And then he describes the Pancha Sharira, Sthula, Sukshma, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya. And you go past that, you go beyond that. You let go of those coverings of your true being. हे पंचकोश एकदेशी मिथ्या जड आणि मला दृश्य आहेत, यांचा प्रकाशक व यांना अधिष्ठानभूत असा सच्चिदानंद रूप आत्मा मी आहे. अशा विचाराने सर्व कोशांचा निराश होऊन अवशिष्ट राहिलेल्या चिद्रूप कूटस्थाशी जीवात्म्याचे अभेदवास पावणे हेच माझे नमन करणे होय. ही profound प्रार्थना आहे from Dnyaneshwar, आणि Dnyaneshwar माझ्या पाठीशी आहे. So I have complete confidence in what I say will be supported or blessed by him. I'm going to quote some of his great observations from Amrutanubhav, which is a profound philosophical writing of his own experience. I want to start with this interesting painting that I did. This was in a village near Pune. It's called Mogarwadi. And this was a simple observation. And I waited for this moment when the 2 ladies were going towards the river and the 2 ladies were coming back from the river. And this man was sitting and watching. It was a simple, ordinary event in the village, but I took a photo and then did this painting. And it shows you how each of us living in this world carry our own burden, not only physically, but mentally. Our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences. And we have to come to grips with that, both individually as well as in a group, in a family or a society. The reason I started with the painting is that in Kashmir Shaivism, what I like most is that it accepts the simple pleasures and the joys of daily life. And you will see what I mean by that. Here is pleasure and joy of living. In Vijnana Bhairav, from verses 69 to 74, various physical and mental pleasures and joys are described, including sexual pleasure, joy and the memory of orgasm, joy of visual beauty, joy of listening to music, joy of savoring tasty food and drinks, enjoying pleasant fragrances, and enjoying the company of family and friends. When all such positive mental states are witnessed passionately as a sakshi, then any of them can lead to one up to the very source of our joys, which is the spontaneous self-transcendent bliss or Brahmananda. After all, the feeling of one's essential blissful being is Satchidananda, the blissful conscious being. With this perspective, a husband and wife or two good friends may meditate together with mutual joy and benefit, or share work, share activities, share enjoyment, share life, share knowledge. So Kashmir Shaivism started with 850 CE, Common Era, and it has several interesting contemplative practices, including contemplation of the biophysical organism or the living body, focusing on sound, silence, and resonance, considering phonemes and words, thinking of a drop in the ocean experience, that I'm a part of this whole infinite cosmic world, and then void or cognitive emptiness, or mental transparency and self transcendence, which is a very unique spiritual experience. And the four major texts in this tradition are Spandakarika, Pratyabhijnana Hrudayam, Shiva Sutra, and Vijnana Bhairav. I have selected few verses or shlokas from each of them, and then I will try to correlate these observations with modern neuroscience just up to this last month. There are some keywords we need to understand. One is Prakasha and Vimarsha. These two terms are very important. Prakasha is the direct light of consciousness, the principle of self-revelation, the principle by which everything else is noticed and known or become conscious. It also includes universal creativity, the creative principle. Vimarsha is the reflective consciousness or self-consciousness or ego consciousness of the highest reality. And then Turiya is the fourth state of non-dual consciousness. And Turiyatita is the beyond Turiya or the universal consciousness itself. Now, some of these terms you come across in the text of Kashmir Shaivism. Chit is the absolute foundational consciousness or the unchanging universal principle underlying all changes. That is the absolute. Chiti is the phenomenal consciousness, the power of the absolute that projects the experiential world or the world process. Chet is the knowable object of consciousness, objects and scenes. And Chitta is the individual mind, the limitation of Chiti or the universal consciousness into an individual mind. And we'll come to that. In Vedanta, it can be summarized as Antakarana. Antakarana is like Mana, Buddhi, Ahankar, and Chitta. And all these can be influenced by Sattva, Rajatama, the three gunas. And Chidananda, of course, is the blissful consciousness, the nature of ultimate reality, or the natural bliss of universal consciousness, or Shiva Shakti Bhava. Now, the first book, Spandakarika, we have to understand what they mean by Spanda. Svarupa Spanda is the essential creative nature of Shiva. Spanda is like an impulse, a creative impulse. Spanda Shakti is represented by the instant Unmesha. Unmesha is the emergence, and instant Nimesha is the submergence. So this whole phenomenal world and mental world emerges, exists for a short period of time, and then submerges back into the primal energy and awareness of Shiva. It is the essential nature of Shiva, as well as we as the individual Atman or being. Now the word is contained in the Spanda principle, and it describes Puryashtaka. Ashtaka means 8. Puryashtaka includes the 5 senses, modalities, and also Mana, Buddhi, Ahankar, or the cognition, intelligence, and ego. But if you want to go back to the creative impulse itself, we have to free ourselves of Puryashtaka to be liberated. Then it talks about 2 types of samadhi or self-absorption. One is Nimilana Samadhi and Unmilana Samadhi. Nimilana Samadhi means being antarmukha or inward journey towards oneself, the deepest roots or the very source of our being. And Unmilana means going out and relating to everything that is. One of the interesting Zen saying is, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. So once you realize your innermost being, the source, you go out and appreciate every little thing that you come across, every human being or every animal or living being that you come across, and have a compassionate and caring relationship. Spanda is the invariant experience in all 4 states of sleep-wake awareness. Spanda is the underlying basis of psychological being. It is our timeless presence. Now, these 2 words are very interesting, that the Spanda has 2 aspects, Samanya and Vishesha. Samanya means general, Vishesha means specific. And you will be surprised in modern neuroscience when we talk about conscious arousal or alertness, we talk about Samanya means general arousal and Vishesha means specific arousal. So our consciousness starts with general arousal in the central brainstem, and then which gets specified in the cerebral cortex. So the source is in the subcortical midbrain area, but then the specification occurs in the specific modular networks in the cerebral cortex. When one is intensely self-aware or the state of presence, then we can relate to this Spanda principle or the Shiva Shakti reality, which is both immanent as well as transcendent. I wanted to, I just took this picture a couple of nights ago. This was a rain puddle with reflection of the telephone post, the clouds, and the sun. And it reminded me of the reflection. See, what happens in the brain, the cortex, is the reflected awareness. Or like the sun and the moon. The sun is in the midbrain, brainstem, reticular activating system. And the cortex, neocortex, with all the modular networks, are like the reflecting moon or the reflecting mirror. So what we experience at the cortical level is self-reflective thoughts and feelings, while the original primary feelings are in the subcortical brainstem limbic area. This is a quotation from Jnaneshwar, from Amritanubhav. जर आरसा आपल्यातच आपल्याला पाहतो, ज्ञानरूप आत्म्याला स्वतःचे ज्ञान होईल. When the mirror can know itself, in itself, it is like that. In the sense that the ultimate self-recognition is intrinsic, it is spontaneous, it's instantaneous. It is not something outside of you. It can never be an object. And that is why it is non-dual. The second book is Pratyabhidnya Vrudrim. Pratyabhidnya means direct knowledge or self-recognition, and Vrudrim means the core or the heart of the self-matter. It has only 20 verses in Sanskrit. Beautiful text. I selected a few which I will share with you. So what we really have to do is to recognize our innermost being, the deepest being, our sense of very existence, the feeling of being, feeling of existence, which is primordial, which is timeless, which is non-dual. And of course, it is indescribable. You know exactly who you are, at the same time, you cannot describe it. You can put many adjectives, but all those are secondary. Then the text says that we have two different self-perspectives. One is a limited self-perspective, or sankochita jiva, or sankochita chitta, or more or less like a narrow-mindedness or self-centeredness. And then, but with this, we suffer from samsara. We have positive feelings, negative feelings, thoughts, experiences. What is interesting that the positive feelings such as seeking, lust, caring, loving, all these are represented in the ventral periaquidal gray matter of the brainstem, and the negative feelings or defensive reactions such as anxiety, fear, anger, sadness, these occur in the dorsal aspect or the back part of the periaquidal gray. And people have come to define these feelings and thoughts so precisely in the central nervous system nowadays. The second perspective is the limitless, timeless, spontaneous, blissful, self-sentient, transcendent being. That is our divine nature, or Shiva Swarupa. That is the divinity, the perfect, deepest awareness and creativity for survival as well as thriving through all situations in life. What is interesting in neuroscience is repeatedly shown, and of course, people have experienced it and expressed it in the ancient times also. These are called ambiguous figures. Now, in the left figure, you can see either you can see a vase, or you can see the two figures, two faces facing each other. In the other figure, this is called the Necker cube, you can see a square facing towards you, or you can look at it in such a way that the same square becomes at the back and the other square becomes the front. So you can change the orientation of this figure. It becomes your choice whether to see the vase or the faces. Similarly, there is a well-known figure, a young woman or an old woman. It depends on how we look. So the point is the reality remains the same, but we choose to see it in a certain way. That is why this perspective, we create our own experience, and then we either enjoy or suffer from it. So in many ways, we are the author of our own experience. The absolute Chiti, by its own free will or intentionality, is the cause of the manifested universe. And by the power of her own will, Chiti unfolds the universe upon her own foundational substratum or the primordial ground of existence. This, of course, is a very subjective view, but that is what you experience in the deepest, at the deepest level of your being. And that universe is manifold because of the differentiation between the subject-object duality. Each one of us has different capacities, different abilities, and we interact with different settings, different objects, different scenes, different scenarios. That's why there is so much multiplicity in the world and also in the human experience. The individual experience in whom Chiti consciousness is narrowed or self-centered has also a narrowed or limited world experience because his personal, his antakarana or world, body, mind, and ego are also limited. But that again is a matter of perspective. Whether you stay and live with a narrow, limited, self-centered perspective, or whether you broaden your perspective, expand your perspective, and in fact, include the whole reality, the whole cosmic reality that is going on in front of you. And you can experience that, you can sense that. Of course, you can't define it, you can't describe it, but you can sense it, you can feel it. By acquiring intuitive knowledge, Chitta itself, by inward movement, becomes Chiti, rising to the status of Chaitana. When the bliss of Chit is attained, there is the stability of identity of consciousness with Chit, while the body is being experienced. This state is called Jivan Mukti, or the absolute self-freedom while living. This is one of my favorite, and it's a profound statement. It says, Madhya Vikasat Chidananda Labha. By the development of the Madhya Dasha, the middle ground state, is there an acquisition of bliss of Chit. The exalted Sambit, universal consciousness itself, is the middle ground in as much as the innermost reality that exists. And you can experience this by what is called Antak Kumbhaka, Bahir Kumbhaka, and Keval Kumbhaka. Kumbhaka means the pause in the breathing. Antak Kumbhaka is the when you take a deep breath in and then pause for a few seconds, that is Antak Kumbhaka. When you breathe out fully and then pause for a few seconds, that is Bahir Kumbhaka. And Kevala Kumbhaka is the pause in breathing that occurs spontaneously because your need for breathing is also minimized, metabolic activity is minimized, demand is minimized. That's why during meditation, you notice that the breathing becomes slow and deep. It can go up to 3 to 6 breaths per minute. In fact, that is one of the recommended technique in yoga and mindfulness, to breathe at 6 breaths per minute. There is even an app on your smartphone to breathe at 6 breaths per minute. Anyway, there's a lot of neuroscience literature on that and research on it. The point is to breathe calmly, slowly, comfortably, and to appreciate the pause in between breaths. Similarly, to appreciate the silence between two sounds, the silence between two words, two thoughts, and the stillness between two voluntary actions or movements. Now, this is very important because any movement, either turning to the left or to the right, or up or down, there are specific circuits and specific neural networks that are involved. That is why in meditation, it is recommended to stay still, silent, and serene, and keep your spine erect and the head straight and eyes sort of focused on one point, either between the eyebrows or beyond the nose or beyond the distance, whichever way you prefer. But the point is to experience that stillness, silence, and serenity, and that can lead you to Madhya Dasha, or the primordial conscious state. This is one of the photographs I took on the St. John's River here in Jacksonville, Florida. The sunsets are beautiful, and you can see the pattern of golden pattern in the waves on the calm river. And waves and ocean has been a simile given many times in our thoughts, feelings, and the underlying consciousness or awareness. Surprisingly, Gnaneshwar describes it in the same way. उठलेली लाट नाहीशी झाली आहे आणि पुढची लाट उठली नाही. अशा वेळी जसे पाणी आपल्या मूळ रूपाने असते, सामान्य विषय धर्मरहित चैतन्य असते. He described the same thing. When the previous wave has subsided and the new wave has not emerged yet, in that calm, still water is the state of stillness, silence, and serenity, which is non-dual, which is amazing. And when this state, such a state, occurs repeatedly by your own mindset and your own way of being, your lifestyle, your way of being, your mindset, your perspective, your dinacharya, your meditative poise, your lifestyle, then the same state can occur repeatedly, spontaneously by itself. Many times I wake up with it without doing anything. And you appreciate the great wonder of that calm, still, silent, serene state, which is always there. It's always in the background. It's always the very ground of our experience, conscious being. But just as we can easily break the silence, we can easily break the peace and the serenity as well, and the stillness. This is another painting that I did in 2016, oil on canvas, same from Mogar body. Such a simple event, and I was struck by it. Each person is playing his own role, including the animals. They are doing the hard work, and each of them is busy. Such a touching scene, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed painting it. I think painting, photography, poetry, all these are great hobbies that takes you back to the very root of our being and root of nature. Now we come to Shiva Sutra. I love this. Shiva Sutra has very precise statements. This is a profound statement. Chaitanya Atma. It says Atma is the original self-effulgent foundational conscious being. Just two words, Chaitanyam and Atma. The universal conscious being or the primordial consciousness is our true nature, is our being. Gnaneshwar again mentioned this. He calls it the Spurti Matra. This Chaitanya Spurta, that means it emerges by itself spontaneously, instantaneously. You really don't have to do anything. That is the nature of our deepest being, innermost being. But we are so busy on the surface, we are so preoccupied with thoughts and emotions and feelings and plans and thinking of the past and the future that we hardly are able to kind of go down deep. I remember when I learned scuba diving in Florida Keys, all 5 of us learned scuba diving. and we were diving together. In the beginning, you are stuck on the surface. You are, of course, afraid of going down under the ocean. You don't know what to expect, what is there. But then you even put some weights around your waist and then slowly go down. And initially, you need the courage to go down. But once you start going down, you continue that, have faith in yourself. And finally, I touched the ground of the ocean, that reef we were scuba diving. And it felt so great because that was it. And from there, I could see the whole surface of the ocean and other scuba divers and other boats and everything. And it was such a beautiful reef that I could appreciate the great wonder of it. It is something similar that you have to go to the very depth of your mind, including conscious, subconscious, and beyond. Drishyam Sharidam, consider the whole body, everything that you observe as your own body. In one of my journal, I wrote that the observed ever changes. The observable observer also changes. But the integrated presence is change-free. So, Jasad Naneshwar says that, hey, Vishwachi Majagar, this whole universe is my home. Similarly, whatever you see, whatever you experience, is your own body. Even Krishnamurti said that you are the world. That's his famous statement. He even published a book, You Are the World. Another statement is Bijavadhanam. Restful, alert consciousness is the very seed of all our conscious experiences. These are profound observations. And the latest neuroscientist named Mark Solms, who published a book called The Hidden Spring, A Journey to the Source of Consciousness. It's a great book, and I recommended it, and I would recommend it. It's a very good book. And I'm going to show you some of the slides from that book. And he talks about the same, the source of consciousness, the source of our own conscious being. One should get absorbed into one's essential conscious awareness, self or being. Then one becomes divine like Shiva Shakti. Shiva Tulyo Jayate. One becomes like divine or the Shiva himself or the Shakti herself. Self-knowledge is the greatest gift or grace. The experiential universe is a projection of our own conscious power or conscious energy, awareness and being. Self-projection and reabsorption, these are the two processes, pravrutti and nivrutti. You go out from the source and create the whole experiential world, including ego, mind, body, and the world. And you come back inside. It's like a tide coming back to yourself, letting go of the world, letting go of the body, letting go of the mind, letting go of the ego, and that's it. And then you smile. That's what I mean when I said that you breathe out, let go, and smile, and there you are. You can sense it. That's the meaning of the word when I published the article, cognitive pause and unload hypothesis. Cognitive pause means you let go of your surface activity that you have been preoccupied with. Let it go. And then it becomes natural, just like your breathing. It becomes natural to relate to that state, the primordial state. The more often you let go, the easier it becomes. First time it is very difficult because you are scared of it. You are holding out tight. You don't want to let go. But once you learn to let go, there is a whole new amazing, blissful, peaceful reality beyond all thoughts and feelings and provocations and all the experiences. It's incredible. And each one of us has the potential to sense that, to feel that, to appreciate that great wonder within each of us. There can be the rise of holistic, integrated awareness or presence again and again. That can happen. Last time I mentioned to you about the art of smiling. There is laughter yoga, similar principle that you let go, you breathe out, let go, be still, silent, and serene, and smile. After all, being happy is the natural state. If you are not happy, there is some problem. That it's like being healthy. Health is normal. Happiness is normal. This is another beautiful painting done by my wife Sunanda. You can see beautifully done the water that was there and the well in the village and all the cows where this woman is giving the cow the water. It was such a peaceful and beautiful scene. Now, in Vijnana Bhairav, this is one of my favorites again. It's about anahatanada or the spontaneous silence that you can hear when your inner speech or internal talk has subsided, or when you are in a very quiet, peaceful place and your mind is not noisy, talkative. When you are in a quiet place and your mind is also very quiet and silent, then it's like a silent mind listening to silence. And it's a profound experience. We should try that sometimes. So, one who is deeply versed and steeped in inner silence, which is like it has also been called Nada Brahman. This inner silence is Brahman in the form of sound energy. This is the spontaneously vibrating, self-sentient energy in all beings. This can be heard only by the ear that is well trained and competent by yoga. This energy goes on sounding uninterruptedly. It rushes headlong like a rapidly flowing river. It's a very powerful energy. It is the ambient energy of what we are surrounded by. We are surrounded by the atmosphere and the whole cosmic field of energy surrounding us. And we can sense that by listening, not only through the eardrum, but also the bones themselves, the skull itself is sensitive to vibrations. So there is both air conduction as well as bone conduction. And there are neural pathways going to the brain to sense or listen to this. It is like the profound silence before the concert starts in a concert hall. The first note breaks that profound silence. So that silence is precious, very precious. Anahatanada. It's a sign that means your mind is relatively quiet and silent. When desire or thinking activity has not risen in me, then in that condition, what am I? So I am that conscious, blissful being, that restful being. And one can get absorbed in the non-dual reality and be identified with it. That which cannot be known as an object, that which cannot be grasped cognitively by thinking, which is void or emptiness or shunya or clarity or transparency, that which penetrates even non-existence, all that should be contemplated as Bhairava. At the end of that contemplation, enlightenment may occur or does occur. All things are revealed by self-awareness, and the self-awareness is revealed by all things. So this is a sort of relationship. But with this dualistic perception, you somehow come to that non-dual state. And it's a very instantaneous switch. Initially, you need effort, but when it actually happens, it's a non-linear dynamic change that happens instantaneously. So the state change is very rapid, instantaneous, just like falling asleep. You never know when you fall asleep, because if you are aware of the moment of your sleep, that means you are not asleep. So that's why so many people are afraid of driving in the early hours of the morning, and so many accidents occur because it can happen instantly. Similarly, when you wake up instantly. You forget the dream disappears, and you wake up. Or you wake up with a quiet, silent awareness. Here Naneshwar says, Prakasha Jagat and Prakashak Chaitanya, they are the same. Ekat Vastu, Vastu Prabha. Vastu here means Atma Prabha. It is the self-effulgent, the light itself of consciousness. You are that. And we need to discover that inner being, the self-effulgent light that is within all of us. Here it talks about when the four aspects of Antakarana, Mana, Buddhi, Ahankara, and Chitta, when they subside, then there is a possibility of spontaneous rise of non-dual state of Bhairava. What is interesting, just as the midbrain reticular activating system can activate the whole cortex and create the experience, similarly, there are inhibitory systems at the brainstem that can deactivate the whole cortex and make it calm and quiet and serene, which is fascinating. So both the mechanisms are there in the brainstem and the cortex. The essence of universal self includes swatantriya, which is self-autonomy, bliss, ananda, and awareness or consciousness, chit. And all these are primordial. They are foundational. They are not dependent on anything. This is not secondary or conditional bliss. This is primordial. That is the very nature of the universal being or self. Here it describes a meditative technique called Hamsa. You breathe in with the sound hum, like aham means I am. So you breathe in with the sound ha, and when you pause, there is the sound ma, and you breathe out with the sound sa, hum, saha, and you, hamsa means swan, and you become kind of still, silent, and serene like the swan on the water. It's another way of looking at it is soham, that I am he or I am she. So I am the divine principle or the energy awareness being. So this is a simple technique or mantra to get back to that primordial state, and also the baseline or the background or the deeper level of our conscious being. Now I will show you some of the things about neuroscience. This is a model of our mental activity. Here you can see, let me point to it. This is the visual input, auditory input, perception, knowledge base, activated prior knowledge, then executive functions. Then this is called the phonological loop, which is inner speech, various sounds and their meanings. And on the right side is the visual cache with inner scribe, copying different gestures and all that. And then episodic buffer is what is going on in the mind at this particular moment in time. So this is like the mental contents from moment to moment. Now the same thing can be related to antakarana, or this is the knowledge base, which is chitta. Executive functions is the ahankara or the ego. Working memory is the mentation. Executive also makes the decision making. This is inner speech and visual images. And this is the input from outside. Interesting diagram. Now, we can also understand the Shiva Shakti principle. The subconscious or conscious mental resting state is the Shiva Bhavana, that profound, limitless, timeless, like the rippleless ocean, like the infinity pool. And that depends on the default mode network and also the midline brainstem structures. And we can get into that. But even the modern science is now saying that this system is spontaneous. It is intrinsically organized, oscillating system. And so this is like the Shiva Sthiti or the Shiva principle or the primordial principle. And the activity is the Shakti Kriya, all that happens, which is task related. Doing this, doing that, thinking of this, thinking of that, all that specified activity occurs in the mental activity, which mainly consists of the phonological loop, visual cache, episodic buffer, central executive, etc. And this is from a recent paper. Now, these areas in the brain, this is a section of the brain. This is the frontal area, medial frontal cortex. This is the medial parietal cortex. This is the lateral parietal cortex. This is a section. This is the posterior cingulate gyrus. This is the frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex. All these areas are continuously active throughout your life. Whether you are asleep or you are dreaming or you are awake, its intensity may change. Intensity does change. During deep sleep, it will be less intense. During dream sleep, it is activated. During wakefulness, of course, it is activated. And during Turiya, we of course don't know exactly. Hard to find volunteers who are in Turiya state. So, but I call it the non-REM wakefulness. So there is a quiet, peaceful, serene alertness, relaxed alertness in Turiya. So here you can see the generalized arousal and specific arousal, which we call Samanya and Vishesha. And I've given the definitions as are accepted in the current neuroscience. And I will share all these slides with you so you can go over it in greater details. This is the fountain within our brain. See, this is the midbrain pontine area, which activates the whole brain, the cortex, thalamocortical system. There is also the inhibitory area, which can deactivate the whole brain and cortex and calm it, put you to sleep. And then there are specific neurotransmitters like epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, acetylcholine, glutamate, and GABA, serotonin. There are also neuromodulators which flood this system. This whole system is flooded, so there is instantaneous communication between different neural network, different centers in the brainstem. And there are what are called gap junctions, which are instantaneous communication in the reticular activating system. Now, this arousal, this is the fundamental arousal. For example, cognitive system, alertness, attention, orientation, and decision. In emotional functions, arousal, temperament, mood, and then feelings. And both these affective network as well as cognitive network are activated from these central systems. Cognitive networks are more dominant in the cortex. Affective networks are more dominant in the subcortex or the reticular limbic regions. This is a brief definition of self-consciousness. Self as a unified being, essential self or essential foundational consciousness. And then Jack Panksepp has done great work. He published the first book called The Affective Neuroscience. He was a real pioneer. A lot of his ideas, he was a professor of veterinary medicine, but he did profound work in human neuroscience. And he was a pioneer. His book called Affective Neuroscience is worth reading. It's profound impressions and discoveries. And he considers consciousness as cognitive consciousness and affective consciousness. And he talks about cognitive consciousness, which is thought process, is mainly in the cortex, and affective consciousness is mainly in the reticular activating system, which is the source of our conscious mind. And the contentless awareness, which is emptying our preoccupations, being free of our preoccupations, and being who you are from moment to moment, takes you to the unity of consciousness and reality, which is Advaita Bhava. This is the general arousal, which then is projected to, say, sexual activity or fear or hunger, thirst, pain. All these different behaviors are projected from that generalized arousal. People have even shown what happens in different parts of the human brain during these emotional states, like grief, sadness, rage, anger, joy, happiness, fear. And you can show the difference in different areas of the brain, how some areas are activated, some are deactivated, depending on the emotional state. One of the statements that Mark Soames made in his book, which is very interesting, he says the affective arousal enables volition, or our ability to be who we are depends on that affective arousal. These are the speech areas, Broca's areas, Wernicke's area, auditory cortex. We organize our sounds, words, phonemes, and sentences. All these different messages are integrated and differentiated in different parts of the brain. This, for instance, is called Wernicke's area, and this receives information from somatic interpretive areas, visual, auditory, and all these are integrated in our experience, which then is communicated to Broca's area, which then goes to the prefrontal cortex, which decides what word to choose and say, and then we act on it. So there are so many areas, networks are involved in our speech and communication. Another interesting thing is what is called working memory. Working memory means our ability to hold some information for a certain amount of time, like 20 to 30 seconds, like remembering a telephone number or somebody's name or some crucial word. And that ability has evolved in human beings much more than lower animals. And we can remember up to 7 plus or minus items for about 20 to 30 seconds. This is an area involved for working memory. Similarly, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is crucial for working memory. And we not only remember such information, but we manipulate that information. We work on that information. So the whole so-called mental process or cognitive process depends on working memory. And we even travel from past to present to future. That is called mental travel, and that depends on these areas. We create our experience of time based on dividing past memory, present, and the future. And that's how we create our experience of time. Now, this monkey is looking at the screen, and when he is expected to remember a particular sign to get a reward, look what his brain is doing here. All these spikes are occurring in his brain to hold that information so that he can get the reward. So a lot of energy is spent when you hold some information in your brain mind for a short period of time and sometimes for days and years, and see how your brain gets preoccupied with such activity. There is actually energy spent in holding something, an ill feeling, a bad memory, or a good memory. Usually good memories don't last that long. It is something bad memory that can stay with you for years and years. And then you go into a sort of vicious cycle of prefrontal, parietal, and inferior parietal. It goes round and round and round. What we call Vichar Chakra, or the whirlpool of our, or the the hurricane or the whirlpool of our thought process and feelings. Now, in The Hidden Springs, which is the name of the book by Mark Soames, just published in February this year, this small area of the brain called mesopontine tegmentum, if you have a lesion, a stroke, or a head injury, or some injury to this area, the whole cortex becomes unresponsive and you lose consciousness. See, all this becomes. So this 2 cubic millimeter area in this region is called parabrachial nucleus or mesopontine tegmentum, can disrupt your consciousness, your awareness. So it's a very powerful region. This region is the midbrain. This is called tectum, this is tegmentum, this is aqueduct of Sylvius, and this is periaqueductal gray. These other neurons are the sources for norepinephrine, serotonin, and other neurotransmitters. When we wake up from sleep or when we fall asleep, see, all these areas are deactivated. When we go from non-REM sleep to dream sleep, all these areas are activated, which is fascinating. Now, with neuroscience, we can show the changes. Here I want to show what has been called the midbrain decision triangle, or the core self. Jack Panksepp called it the core self. Self as simple ego type life form. And so this is the triangle. These are the three nuclei. This is superior colliculus, this is periaquedural gray, and this is mesencephalic locomotor center. Now, the superior colliculus integrates all the perceptions, sensory input. This is where we know exactly what's happening at this moment. The periaquedural gray integrates all the feelings and thoughts and our emotions at that particular moment. And the mesencephalic locomotor center can instantly act like a flight, fight, run, hide, whatever it is, or like a butterfly swimming, or take a beginning of a run or a sports activity. That is the moment when we initiate some instantaneous activity. So that is the important midbrain decision triangle. And then this information, of course, is transmitted to the cortex for further processing. Mark Soames talks about this free energy principle theory of consciousness. And what he's saying that the homeostasis or the body is trying to achieve a settling point. And if there is a displeasure or some suffering or stress, we try to bring it back to it. So this he calls the feeling homeostasis. If there is some stressful situation, we try to correct it. If you are feeling too hot, you take your jacket off or something, start air conditioning. Or if you are too cold, you try to put your shirt on or jacket on or sweater on. This is physical level, but also emotional level. If some situation is bothering you, something is upsetting you, then you try to act on it. And in neuroscience currently, there is a lot of trend about what they call predictive processing. Predictive processing means we predict that I'm going to be such and such, and my world is going to be so and so. And if it turns out to be true, then that's fine. You don't need to change your model. You don't need to change anything. But if it doesn't happen that way, then you need to change your model. You change your expectations. So it's a matter of what we call expectation and reality. And the bigger the gap between expectation and reality, the more unhappy you will be. For somebody who is really happy on his own, spontaneously, for no particular reason, there is the least gap between expectation and reality. So this is the principle that many people, Anil Seth from London, Sussex, England, talks about the same thing. And Mark Soames also talks about the free energy principle. And the free energy principle means that the second law of thermodynamics says that any form that has energy, then energy keeps dissipating exponentially. But with the free energy principle, there is opposition or resistance to that decline. And some people have even called it negative entropy. So the free energy principle is like the negative entropy, which is fascinating. This settling point reminds me of sthita prajna, is the emotional equilibrium, being balanced both cognitively and affectively. This is like the moment of optimacy, or the best one can be at this given moment. This is a picture I took from our dock, and these markings, these watermarks, are very typical of a manatee crossing the waters. This is because manatee has a huge back. These are like 12 to 14 feet long animals, huge, and they are underwater. And when they cross, they create these sort of patterns. And these are typical of manatee crossing the river. It is interesting that Naneshwar mentioned this. Manoni maji vaikhari, maunache hi maunakari, he paniyavari makari rekhilia. He says that my speech becomes so silent. It is the silence of silence. That if you try to, it's like trying to draw something on a very calm water surface. The moment you finish drawing, that disappears. The water becomes water again. So it is like that. Maunatse hi maunaka. So there is fundamental unity in Shiva Shakti and the whole existential reality. We are in it and we are it. To this, we need to recognize this truth, and that is Pratyavidnya. All of us have the potential for such self-recognition. There is no need to mentally suffer in life and be fearful. One can live wholeheartedly with joy and love for oneself and others. Life is good and beautiful. Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Thank you for your attention. This is a beautiful orchid that grew second year this time. Such a beautiful orchid is blooming every day. Life is good, beautiful, and precious. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deshmukh. I'm going to go to the chat box and read out questions that have been already submitted. And after that, we'll open the audience to ask questions, make comments, and whatever discussion we want to continue. So give me a second and I'll go to the first question.
Thank you.
And first question comes from Chandar Ranade, who's asking why some prefer meditating in a group compared to meditating alone. Dr. Deshmukh?
Yes, I think that is just a matter of preference and the situation. Sometimes, most of the time, I meditate alone, mostly in the morning. Sometimes me and my wife, we meditate at the dock, watching the sunset and the beautiful sky or the sunlight. So it depends. It depends on the situation. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, what matters is what state of being you are in, what state of mind you have, whether you have that profound inner peace, inner silence, stillness, and serenity. That's what matters. But I say that two brains are better than one. They work better than one.